I agonized and asked myself what it is that a lawyer can tell to an assembly of engineers. But I was cajoled, and ultimately I succumbed, and here I am to share my thoughts, whatever those thoughts are. When you fly across Africa today, if you fly into Entebbe, the airport is being expanded. I would want to hear that Ugandan consulting engineers are taking 80% of the credit. I would want to know, you will tell me. When I fly into Julius Kambarage International Airport in Dar es Salaam, I see the expansion that is going on there. I would want to know that the Tanzanian consulting engineer is playing the lion's role there. I would want to hear. When I go to Bole International Airport in Ethiopia, the expansion is going on there. I would want to know that the African engineer is involved there, that the African architect is involved there. When I go to Blaise Diagne Airport in Dakar, in Senegal, I would want not to hear that some French designer designed it. The tragedy is, what I would want to hear is not what I hear. So that the consulting African engineer is in quite a number of countries still consigned to doing some rural roads. So that we may commission our football stadia, but they are designed in China and built by Chinese. That is not the path of growth that I would want to hear. I would want to hear another path of growth. Let us learn from the Chinese, but let us learn to do certain things ourselves. This is what Africa must hear. This, in my view, is what Africa must do. This is what other civilizations have done for sustainable development. You ask the Koreans how they did it. Ask the Chinese how they did it. Ask any other civilizations how they did it. Ask the Indonesians how they are doing it. They are using expertise from the world, but certain things are ring-fenced for their own professional. Do we ring-fence things for ourselves? I'm told we are ring-fencing only 30% in Uganda. Why are we ring-fencing 30%? Let us ring-fence 70%. It can't be done because it is a question of cross-fertilization of ideas. We must learn from other civilizations, but learning must not mean surrendering to them. I'm submitting to us that we surrender to them. And going forward, therefore, you who are present here, we must think of another Africa. An Africa where when we talk about technology, whether it is in solar technology today, Morocco, and I stand to be corrected, is engaged in developing one of the largest solar farms anywhere in the world. I'm still talking about consulting engineers even in that field. Kenya is doing another major solar project, and all African countries ought to be engaged in it. Namibia, I think, is also engaged in it. But if you ask who the consulting engineers are for those projects, they are not Africans. Even the solar panels that are going to be used, the best that African countries will do is to assemble them. They'll be brought as completely knocked down kits, and ours is to assemble them as our children assemble Lego. We are talking about water and water, which is an important thing, and water engineering. And we have consulting engineers in that regard. Even when we talk about water engineering, And the drilling equipment, I know of no African country that makes water drilling equipment. Perhaps South Africa. South Africans correct me. When we are talking about road infrastructure, I know that sometimes even when we are doing the roads, even the one here, the Kampala and Entebbe Expressway, the contractors, under the guise of something that they now call design and build, will even import steel from their countries, saying that ours has too much carbon content. Sometimes even cement is imported because ours is claimed not to have certain ingredients. I'm still talking about consulting engineers. When we are doing our railways, we may celebrate them all we want, but when we receive the wagons, they are rehabilitated engines that belong to the museums alongside the spinning wheel. I'm submitting to us that the consulting engineer is important to Africa's growth and development. You cannot deny that. And I can see the vision. I can see what the African leaders were thinking about when they met in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and came up with Agenda 2063. They were looking at the engineer and they were saying that the engineer, well, if he is a civil engineer, let him be an African civil engineer who is aware of the African terrain. Let him be an engineer who is equipped with what he or she needs to grow Africa, so that when he or she is engaged in designing and ultimately presiding over the building of African roads, he knows his or her continent. That is what they were thinking. So that when they are building this road across the continent to the equatorial forest of Congo, they are building and they are empowering other African engineers. I saw them thinking about that. They must have been thinking about hydroelectric power, and they were thinking about generating power from the nearly 1,270 hydroelectric power stations that we have built. They were thinking of geothermal, and they were thinking of consulting engineers who have African experience and know Africa and relate with other civilizations in a manner that is beneficial to Africa. They must have been thinking like that. When they were thinking about fuel, fossil fuel, and they were thinking about the pipeline, they must have been thinking about chemical engineers and other related engineers who would be doing things for the benefit of Africa. They were thinking about aeronautical engineers that would be capable not only of ensuring that the planes that are made in Europe and America fly, but who are moving progressively to ensuring that even Africa can produce an aircraft. The Brazilians have done it in our lifetime. But today, that is not the truth. So, fellow engineers, if I have dampened your spirit, that was my intention. Because it is those dampened spirits that are capable of providing a fertile ground for the fruit of growth to germinate. This continent is capable of achieving much. Africa today has a population of 1.1 billion. We are 55 countries, and all the 55 countries, our economy is only as big as that of India. We can do better. And if we are going to do better, I have no doubt in my mind that you great minds that are gathered here, because the minds that are present here are some of the best minds that Africa can offer. Let it not be business as usual. Let it not be that you have expanded your farm to include 100 engineers to do work that has been handed down to you by some European or Chinese firm. No. Let it be that you are also capable of doing things in your own right. You can do it. You must do it. Because if you don't do it, the thing that we call growth will never be realized. We'll have symbols of what we describe as growth, but Africa will never grow. We'll have things that appear to represent growth, but Africa will never have grown. But yet there is a sense in which, even from a layman's perspective, one can speak about infrastructure and the role of the consulting engineer. As I travel across Africa, and I do that quite often, it is not lost on me that whether you are in Dakar, in Senegal, there are beautiful roads that are coming up. Whether you are in Bamako, in Mali, or Cotonou in Benin, or here in Uganda, or in Nairobi in Kenya, or in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, or whichever country, there is a sense in which, to the casual observer, dramatic changes are taking place in Africa. If it is not roads described as superhighways or expressways, it is an hydroelectric plant. If it is not a hydroelectric plant, it is a solar farm. If it is not a solar farm, it is some kind of construction that is going on. And to those who are in the business and in the habit of assessing development by those visually very intrusive projects, Africa is rising. But the question is Africa rising at the pace that she ought to rise? And if she is rising, for whom is she rising? And if she is rising, how is she rising? These are questions that sometimes at a forum such as this, in order to be a good guest, you do not want to go into too deep into them, lest you offend and annoy your audience at once.